Hello and welcome to another lecture for Ethics in Journalism. I'm Professor Harper, and today we're going to talk about guidelines for covering a law enforcement action. Now, this is clearly a news issue, but it also becomes an ethical issue. To make sure that we get this stuff right, we have to think about what we do and have a plan before something happens. It's likely, if you go into journalism, that you will be covering some sort of law enforcement raid or arrest or something like that. So, or something as significant as a mass shooting. So let's go through this, and this is from the Radio Television Digital News Association. Now it's at www.rtdna.org. Well, there are a lot of suggestions about ethical issues and how to deal with a variety of issues, and we'll be going through some of these as we move on through the semester. So, first of all, in covering a developing raid or law enforcement action, it's important to be extremely cautious to not compromise the secrecy of officials planning and executing a raid. If you're staking out a location where a raid will occur, or if you're accompanying officers, it's important that you demonstrate great caution in how you act and where you go. And that any clues that might inadvertently give on air or later on, but particularly with radio and television, that you don't compromise the execution of a raid. You may think that the raid is not a good thing. It's not an ethical thing. But it's not your place at this point to get involved in whether or not there is justification for the law enforcement action. Okay? So, a few things. Always assume that the hostage taker, the gunman, or terrorist has access to your reporting. Obviously with radio and television, but also it can be a text version that's being tweeted, running on a news publication's website, and so you need to make sure that you're not describing in words or showing with photography or video any information that could divulge the tactics or positions of local police or SWAT team members. Okay. You should not become involved. A journalist should not become involved unless it's an absolutely last resort in the hostage situation or the terrorist incident. Journalists should become involved only as a last result in a consultation with senior management at your news organization and with the police. This happens when, for example, the gunman asks to have a member of the news media as one of the demands in a negotiation. But be very careful. So be forthright with viewers, listeners, or readers about why certain information is being withheld, that if security reasons are involved. Okay. You also have to weigh whether the benefits to the public of what information you have might be given out versus what potential harm might be created if that information is made public. There have been a number of cases where incorrect names have been given out while an event has been going on, that there has been bad reporting. I mean, it's a news event, and so therefore there are going to be mistakes made. So be very careful about what you say on the air or on the web or tweet out. Okay. You need to notify authorities immediately if a hostage taker or a terrorist calls the newsroom. And you need to have, your news organization needs a plan ready for how to respond. Okay. These are very critical moments in a police action, and you need to think about this beforehand so that someone can go quickly to a guideline printout or something that's on the computer system for a news organization. Here's what you do when somebody calls. It's also important to do the same thing when someone claims to be an eyewitness. Okay, be be careful about what you put on the air or in text that may mess up the whole situation. Okay. Um, don't give out any information or speculate about the the bad guy's mental condition, state of mind, or reasons for actions while a standoff is in progress. I mean, it may sound like this is a no-brainer, but these are the types of mistakes that people make. Why is somebody doing this? Well, we don't know. And in fact, we may never know why someone is doing it. So it's useless information and potentially dangerous information if people are talking about this type of speculation. Okay? Don't analyze or comment on any demands that are being made, like how ridiculous it is that somebody is demanding that a helicopter land outside or that they get $1.2 million. If you know those demands, I mean, it's probably better to simply not talk about the demands, but if you're going to talk about the demands, stay away from analyzing why those demands have been made. Okay. One thing that always happens when there's a big story is that news helicopters go into the area where a standoff is happening. Their noise creates communication problems for negotiators. Their presence could scare a gunman to deadly action. Again, you really have to weigh, is it really critical that you have that eye in the sky, that you have the information and the coverage, as opposed to what interference that may be causing in the whole situation. Okay. Don't report information obtained by police scanners. Okay. All news organizations listen to police scanners. Okay, but you have to be very, very careful about whether you use it just for planning purposes or for news purposes. Do not use it for news purposes. Okay. Be cautious about reporting the medical condition of hostages until after a crisis is concluded. Okay, so one thing that I ran into when I was in the Middle East a lot is interviewing hostages. We had a situation where some terrorists had taken a group of hostages, made them available to us to be interviewed, and we had to think long and hard about, are we playing into the terrorists' hands, or are we giving these hostages a way to get out from the poor conditions that they were in. And what we decided to do was agree to do the interview, but to make it clear to the hostages that if they didn't want the interviews aired on ABC News, that we wouldn't do that. It seemed to be a decent compromise. Okay. It's better not to interview family members or friends of those involved in standoff situations or hostages. People can get very emotional, for obvious reasons. Okay, and most of the time, this doesn't add to the story. It simply creates, the shock value, and is better to be left alone. Okay. Go beyond the basic story of the hostage taking or standoff to report on the larger issues behind the story. Examine how and the why of what happened. Report on the preparation and the execution of how the SWAT team went about its business, either for good or for bad. Okay, so these are some overall ethical considerations and practical considerations in dealing with law enforcement actions. So I'm going to turn now to ethical issues when it comes to kind of the aftermath of these types of things. And it has to do with reporting on grief, tragedy, and victims. Okay, so when you have a crime or an accident or some sort of tragedy, it's part of the cycle of reporting. It's part of, people are born, they get married, they live their lives, and they die. But it has to be done with sensitivity. Okay, so that the issue, and this is according to the Society of Professional Journalists at spj.org, the the issue here is to minimize harm to those who are involved, so that you need to show compassion for those who may be affected adversely by news coverage, and be sensitive when seeking or using interviews or photographs of those affected by tragedy or grief. You need to recognize that gathering and reporting information may cause harm or discomfort. And you need to realize that private people have a greater right to control information about themselves than do public officials. Okay? You need to show good taste. Avoid pandering to lurid curiosity. I mean, it's, you've all heard, if it bleeds, it leads. We tend to get into that over and over and over again, and it doesn't necessarily do much good in terms of providing information about what happened. But what I always found is that if you approach someone who has been affected by some tragedy, that if you say, your son or your brother, we'd like to do a story about him, and we'd like to have him remembered as he was, and you knew him far better than I did. If you could just give us some insight into what he was like, and provide that as a memorial for this incident. And if you want to go forward, let's talk about it. If not, I respect your privacy. So, just some ethical considerations on dealing with breaking news when it comes to law enforcement, and also how to deal with those victims of tragedy. So that's what we have for this week, and so I'll see you online. Thanks very much.